pray about it, you bring them that night, that could be the night that they give their life to Christ, man, and the rest will be a whole brand new story for them. All right, so tonight, we're going to jump into the conclusion of our series, 3-week series. It's been spread out over several weeks because we've done some different things, but Underdogs, the greatest comebacks. So who can tell me who was the first character we talked about in this series? Who was it? David, yes. And fourth was little David. And then the last time, the second part of the series, we talked about who? Daniel. Yes. So tonight, we're going to talk about a different character that has an absolute, to me, probably the most amazing story about an individual in the Bible showing forgiveness. When his life looked like, man, it was over, not once but twice, looked horrific, he demonstrated such forgiveness in his heart, and God elevated him both times because of the forgiveness that he had. So this is a great story. So tonight, we're going to conclude part 3, Underdogs, the greatest comebacks. Then I'm going to share with you my final story that I promised you that I will tell you about me, my senior year of high school, and something that I did when I was in school. So I've given you a story of my freshman year and something my junior year in part 2. So part 3, I'm going to share with you something I did my senior year that I'm not proud of, but I was an underdog. Man, what a great comeback, because now I'm serving Jesus. I started serving Jesus just a few months after high school. So, part 3. Genesis chapter 45, verses 1 through 11. This is the too many scriptures, so I didn't want to put it on a bunch of slides. So I want you to listen to me. So look at each other and say, shh. Time to be quiet. All right? Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother." They didn't recognize him. "Whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there is still 5 more years to go in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry up and go get my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. Therefore I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine.'" Forbes. Shh. So, who in here, be honest, who in here is familiar with the story of Joseph? Okay? The different things he went through. Good. Those of you who are not, good, because you'll learn something new tonight. So, Joseph felt no doubt in his life, and early on, when his brothers had forsaken him, he felt forsaken and forgotten. Remember, he was thrown in a pit, and his brothers left him there. But he rose to the top by trusting God and forgiving those who hurt him. See, forgiveness is a hard thing to do. Forgiveness is hard to forgive people. It's hard sometimes, I've found in my life, it's hard sometimes to forgive ourselves. Sometimes people have forgiven us, and we just struggle, and we wrestle, and we fight with forgiving ourselves for something that we did to somebody else that hurt somebody. So let's look at the definition of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the intentional and voluntary process by which a victim undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding an offense. Let's go of negative emotions. Negative emotions like vengefulness. Dave Willis said this, put our first slide up there. "A grudge doesn't make you strong, it makes you bitter. Forgiving doesn't make you weak, it sets you free." So let's kind of look for just a minute at Joseph's story a little bit. Joseph believed God was in authority over every part of his life, even the difficult moments. Isn't it hard sometimes to think that God is in control of your life when things aren't going good? We're like praising God, man. We're standing, we're just hands raised, we're singing to the mountaintops, we're shouting, God is so good when everything's going good. But then when things aren't going so well, sometimes it's hard to acknowledge that God is still in authority over my life and has a plan. See, Joseph's jealous brothers stole his youth from him. Now remember, God spoke to him, gave him a dream, and he went and told his brothers, well, God spoke to me, and I'm going to do this, man, and I'm going to rule, and I'm going to be great, and I'm going to be over all of you. Told all his big brothers that. Well, if you remember the story, his big brothers didn't take that so well. They were jealous of little Joseph. He was Daddy's favorite. And if you got a sibling that's Daddy's favorite, look at all his hands going up. Yes, yes, yes. He was Daddy's favorite. They didn't like it. They were jealous. They were jealous, and they sold him into slavery, left him in a pit. Joseph was then, after he was sold into slavery, after they considered murdering him. Not only did they do that, they considered murdering him. They were going to kill their little brother. I don't want to show hands. Have you ever thought about killing your little brother or sister? No showing hands. Keep your hands down, hands down, hands down, hands down, hands down. Because we're going to have a big altar time tonight if hands look everywhere. All right? Well, they actually bad acted on it. Okay? So after all this, Joseph was then carried off to another nation. He was carried off only later to be falsely accused and sent to prison. So then he was in a pit. Then he went to Potiphar's house. Then he rose up high. Things were going great, man. Things are going good. And then Potiphar's wife made an advance at him. He ran. She lied on him. He's thrown into prison. It's like, what in the world? So far we see in Joseph's story, he's gone from the pit to Potiphar's house. Now he's in the prison. Man. But he's still trusting God. I wonder how I or you would have reacted if all of our family turned against us, it felt like. His dad didn't, because remember they went back and they lied to Dad and brought his coat and said he's dead. They lied to their father about his favorite child, his son. Said he was dead. Imagine, how would you have reacted if you felt like most all your family had turned against you, left you and forsaken you? Would you have been able to forgive them when you were sold off into slavery? And then, all of a sudden, things were going good in Potiphar's house. Would you have been able to forgive them then, or would you still kind of held a grudge? Thought, man, they did this to me. I'm still kind of here as a slave, and Then all of a sudden, man, no control of your own. When Potiphar's wife makes an advance at him and he runs and she lies on him, he's now thrown into prison. So if you maybe begun to God over what your family did to you, or maybe, have your friends ever done anything to you like that? Kind of sold you down the road? Maybe they didn't. Your friends didn't sell you into slavery like Joseph's brothers did, but maybe your friends sold you down the road. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Some of you do. You just got real wide-eyed. Don't say it. So they sold you down the road, and now all of a sudden he was maybe trying to get over it, or maybe you're trying to get over it. And now all of a sudden he finds himself in prison. I don't know about you, but I'd be like, you know what? It's all my brother's fault. I can get out of these floors. I mean, I got to be real. I'd be like, you know what? It's their fault I'm in this prison. Thought things were working out. I was getting over it, Emily, but here I am again. It's their fault. I'm stuck in a prison, and I wouldn't be here if my brothers didn't leave me in that pit and sell me into slavery. Man. But you know what? He had forgiveness. He had forgiveness. He had forgiveness. Look at your neighbor and say, he had forgiveness. In chapter 45, Joseph had been rescued out of prison and promoted to the second man in all of Egypt, fulfilling every bit of the prophetic dreams that he had as a child. You see, sometimes God will give you a word and he'll give you a dream, but you don't need to shout it from the mountaintops. Sometimes God will speak to you in that quiet place. Maybe he'll lay you out in the spirit. Maybe you'll be praying and crying, God will speak to you, I'm going to do this in your life. You don't need to get up and run and tell all your friends, God's going to do this. Man, I saw myself singing here, preaching here, doing this, teaching, I'm going to do this great, mighty work for God. Your friends will look at you and say, what? Girl, you can't sing. Sometimes you don't need to tell everybody what God is speaking to you, because we can't handle what everybody's going to say back to us. Okay? Sometimes we don't need to run and say it. We need to wait and be patient. Okay? He just showed the patience and forgiveness, what God did yet again, and elevated him, and now he's the second in all of Egypt. Got to understand the significance of that.
So now his brothers, because there's been a famine in the land for 2 years, his brothers show up needing grain to survive this massive drought. Because of the wisdom that God had given Joseph, he set forth this plan that was going to save all of Egypt. And all these people weren't going to die from everybody from famine because of what he set in motion. And so now his brothers were forced to come to Egypt to try to get food to survive. And look who's there waiting for him. So his brothers showed up to survive the drought, and they hadn't recognized him yet in chapter 45. But Joseph immediately knows that it's his brothers. So in this scene, he can no longer contain his emotions in chapter 45. And everyone leaves the room. He tells them to all leave except his brothers. And eventually, he reveals his identity to his brothers. And in terror, because the brothers feel guilty of what they had done, yet he is quick to reassure them. So I wonder how I would have acted if I was in that place. I wonder how you would have acted. I mean, you can imagine how it kind of feels like, everybody get out! But you guys right here, everybody out. You're about to die. You ain't got no food. Family been in the land for 2 years. You don't recognize who this is. And then you realize, oh no, that's our little brother. He's all grown up. And he has just shut the doors and sent everybody out. I mean, this is his moment to just go off on his brothers. What would you have done? I mean, have you ever had a chance to go off on your brother or sister?
Yes. I can't.
Have you ever had a chance to go off on some close friends that kind of sold you down the road, and then you got your moment, and you said, that is not what happened at all, Mr. Principal. Let me tell you what they said and what they did. They threw me outside and locked the door, and I was late. It wasn't my fault. You ever had a chance?
Yes.
He had a chance with the door shut to just give them up one side and down the other. He could have them killed. He could have done whatever he wanted. But he didn't. Because he'd already forgiven them for what they'd done years ago. And that's why God elevated him up in what he was in and in his circumstances. God elevated him, but it didn't look good, and it was up, and it was down, and it was up, and it was down, even in his life. So we see he got thrown in the pit, then he was in Potiphar's house, then he was in the prison, now he's in the palace. So some of you right now, you're stuck in the pit. Some of you in Potiphar's house, you feel like you're a slave to something. Some of you tonight might be in the prison. Some of you might be in the palace. But you got to choose in your heart to forgive those that have wronged you. You got to choose to forgive those that have spitefully used you. You've got to choose in your heart and purpose in your heart to forgive those that have talked about you. Because I got news for you. It's going to happen your whole life. So you might as well learn now as a student in middle school or high school that you got to forgive. Because if you don't, God will never elevate you. God will never elevate you to new places. Can you imagine the stories and the lies that those brothers had to continue to tell on Joseph to cover the lie? That's how it is. Anybody ever lied to your parents and you got to tell a lie to cover a lie, and then you got to tell another lie to cover the lie? It's like, oh, you find like, I'm sorry, I'm lying, Mom, Dad. I did it. I'm sorry. They keep kind of questioning you a little bit, because they kind of know something don't look right. They just imagine they had to keep telling stuff and tell stuff. What an excuse that Joseph had to offer to why he couldn't forgive. I mean, he could stand here and say, I don't forgive none of y'all. You left me for dead. You thought about murdering me. Then you sold me into slavery. You told Dad I was dead. I mean, like, I was over it, but now you told Dad I was dead? Then it's like you're reliving everything again. Nope, not Joseph. What an excuse that he had to offer and say, do you know what I've been through? I was a slave, and then I was put into prison. I was wrongfully accused. He didn't do none of that. He didn't rant. He didn't throw a temper tantrum. I know none of y'all ever throw temper tantrums. Right? No, yeah, I've seen some of you throw some temper tantrums. I know some of you do. He didn't do none of that. Charles Stanley said this. Listen to me. This is good stuff. We're to forgive that we may enjoy God's goodness without feeling the weight of anger burning deep within our hearts. Forgiveness does not mean we reenact, forgiveness does not mean we recant the fact that what happened to us was wrong. Instead, we roll our burdens onto the Lord and allow Him to carry them for us. That's because Jesus said, cast your burdens on me. Our next slide. Your past is part of the plan. And once you realize this, it has no power over you. You got to understand the past is in the past. God had such a plan for Joseph's life. If he would have wallowed in the past and blamed his brothers and what his brothers did to him and how they lied on him and all the things they said about him, and he'd stayed in that place of unforgiveness, he never would have been elevated to Potiphar's house. But then he went into the prison because he was wrongfully accused, and yet he still didn't harbor that in his life. We've got to understand that ups and downs, turns and twists, mountains and valleys, God has got us on a plan. We've got to continue to serve Him and worship Him and love Him and be faithful to Him no matter what's going on in our life. You got to be faithful when people are talking about you. You got to be faithful when people are lying on you. You got to be faithful when you feel like you don't have any friends. You got to be faithful when you feel like you have more friends than you've ever had. You got to be faithful when you feel like everybody loves you. You got to be faithful when everything's going perfect, and you got to be faithful when it seems like nothing is going right. Because God's got you on a plan. Look at your neighbor and say, God's got a plan for you. Now I want you to look back at Him and say, it's bigger than what you think it is. Because see, we want to sell ourselves short. We want to sell ourselves short of the plan that God's had for us. See, many believers become trapped in the idea that they should pray. Listen to me. Many believers become trapped in the idea that they should pray and ask God to help them feel like forgiving those who have hurt them. But this kind of prayer is counterproductive and only prohibits actual forgiveness from taking place in our hearts. I'm beyond thankful tonight that when I needed Jesus, in September of 1992, on a Sunday night just like this, with the deceased Pastor Paul Lanier preaching, that I came to an altar and I knelt down and I just had decided I can't live this life anymore without Jesus. And I said, Jesus, I need you to forgive me. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I'm so thankful tonight that Jesus didn't say, let me think on that. I'm glad he didn't say, let me go consult with some other people so I can make my decision if I'm going to forgive you or not. I'm so thankful that when I needed Him and I was at that moment in my life where I knew I was broken and I was hurting and I was lost, and I said, I need you to forgive me. Please forgive me for what I've done. He was right there with the arms open. Before I got on my knees, He met me in the aisle with His arms out, because He knew when I stepped out of the aisle to come to the front, He knew what my intention was, and His arms were there ready to forgive me. Corrie ten Boom says this: forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. We've got to make sure we forgive. Next slide. Unforgiveness is choosing to stay trapped in a jail cell of bitterness, serving time for someone else's crime. Sometimes they move on from it, man. But if you don't, you're serving time for their crime. You got to move on and forgive. You don't need to lose any sleep over somebody that's putting you down or talking about you or being negative in your life, or somebody that you feel like has wronged you, which is what Joseph could have spent years doing, but he didn't do that. He would look like an underdog. Man, you're reading the story, if you read it for the first time and you see what his family does and his brother's thrown in a pig, like, ooh, man, he's about to die. This is going to be bad. Is he going to starve to death and die of a slow, painful death? I mean, what's going to happen? Then he gets into slavery, you're like, it's even worse. Maybe he wished he was dead. What a comeback. Second man in Egypt, ruling all over Egypt and all the land, and saves the whole land. You know why? Because he didn't hold unforgiveness in his heart. He didn't hold stuff against his parents. He didn't hold stuff against his brothers. He didn't hold stuff against his friends. You can't harbor negative feelings in your heart or in your mind about your family or your friends. You got to let it go. forgiveness happens at a specific moment in time, in prayer with the Lord. The feelings will eventually follow, but the act of forgiveness is an event. A forgiveness prayer should sound something like this. Lord, I choose now in obedience to you, to your word, to forgive so-and-so for such and such. You insert whatever it is. I release them from the debt they owe me because you already paid it with your precious blood on the cross. I forgive them, and I ask you to bless them. You see, our freedom through forgiveness will benefit us and all those around us. It doesn't take long to hang around an unforgiving person because you will see that they are bitter. You will see them bitter. It will just come out. It'll come out. It can't not come out. We never know how God may use even our testimony of forgiveness to set others free. We may be able to look back and say, because of trusting in God. Genesis 50, verse 20 says, you meant evil against. Is that for me? Is that your water?
No, it's yours.
You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order. This is what Joseph said in Genesis 50, 20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to save many people's lives. Can you believe that God allowed his brothers to throw him in a pit, sell him into slavery, lie to his parents that he was dead, and it was all part of the plan?
That's messed up.
He went through all of that. Potiphar's house, been in prison. Are you kidding me? This poor guy, as you follow the story in Genesis, man, what a life, what a struggle. And now he's second in Egypt, and because of what God speaks to him, he's able to save the whole land from starvation. It's all part of what he had in plan to do. Our next slide. Forgiveness takes back the power we may have given to someone else for wrongdoings. Forgiveness takes back the power we may have given to someone else for their wrongdoings. You got to forgive. Look at your neighbor and say, you need to forgive me. I don't know what I've done, but I'm sorry. Some of you might know what you did, but don't preach it to them right now. Tell them later, okay? So look, the more you rejoice in your own forgiveness, the quicker you will be to forgive others. We got to forgive. God wants to set you up for a comeback. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. God wants to do that in your life. Okay? Man, I had a track record in school of just making bad decisions. So I shared with you about my freshman year, and she, doing my fake report card with my friend, right? Y'all remember that? If you weren't here, my freshman year, high school, I had a friend make me a report card, didn't think through that plan, so I had to make him make the report card every single report period the whole year. Share that story with you. Then we shared about Daniel. Then I shared with you my junior year how I traced over my whole report card, and I was in a new school because I moved with my mother. And since I was a new student, the guidance counselor called the house and said, "Hey, Miss Terry, I just want to check with you about your son." It's like, "Oh yeah, he's doing great." She said, "Well," they said, "Actually, we want to call because he's failing a class." And the mom's like, "He's not failing anything." The guy's like, "Yes, he is." Like, "No, my son did not fail." It's like, "Yes, he did." I was like, "No, he didn't. He made all A's and B's." And the guy's kind of said, "No, he made an F in English." And my mom said, "Let me get his report card." I was like, I had traced over the whole report card with a pencil and taken an F and made it a B. That was my junior year. So here we are my senior year. Okay? So let me share this quick story with you. So my senior year of high school, I'm taking Algebra 2 for the second time because we did not agree the first time. Okay? Who in here just does not like Algebra 2? Raise your hand. Yes, can I get a witness? Somebody lay hands on Jonathan. He enjoys it. No, I'm just kidding. I did not, I didn't learn until after I got saved and after high school. Then all of a sudden, man, when I went to college, man, I studied and made straight A's. I've never made anything but an A in all my college courses I've taken. But in high school, my excuse I'm going to give y'all is my heart wasn't right and I was not in church. Y'all all in church, you're in the youth group, you got no excuses, you didn't make university homework. Okay? Anyway, back to the story. So, we figure out a couple weeks in my senior year, me and a few students,
that this friend that I had, I won't say her name because we're friends on Facebook, and she made, I don't want to sell her other, I never ratted on her. But anyway, we're talking, and she's like the teacher's assistant. She passed out into the previous year, so she's like assisting him her senior year. And she's like, hey, Dallas, Coach, or Mr. Heisey, he was also my soccer coach. He's not changed the test this year. The tests are exactly the same. I'm like, what? She said, I kept all my tests from last year. I'm like, girl, you got to hook me up. I need you to give me those tests. And so she's like, okay. So every week, she would meet me on Thursday night. Tests were always on Friday. I don't know what you know. We had an algebra 2 test with 10 questions every single Friday. And then we had an English quiz every single Friday for words. I'm like, who's got time to study, right? So I never studied. It's a bad decision, okay? Anyway, so I'd get the test on Thursday, and I would take the answers, and you get to show your work right on paper. So you got my paper, and I would take the test paper and lay it on top of my stack of papers, and I would trace over it really hard and write really hard over all the numbers real hard. Okay? Then I could take that off, and I could sit here and hold the piece of paper and it would look perfectly clear. Now look, Lord, if any of these kids try this, I want you to find them out.
But I know what you're talking about.
I want you to find them out the first time they do it. Lord, I'm not telling this for you to do this, okay? Full disclaimer, parents, don't let them do this. So look, if I held the piece of paper, you wouldn't be able to see it. But now if I look at the paper right here, I could see the indentation of all the math problems on the piece of paper. So I'd slide that under my little stack of 4 or 5 scratch pieces of paper. When it was test time, because that's all that's on my desk in my little white sheets of paper. And so it's test time, I just pull out that little piece of paper, and there are what Forbes. I'm going to tell your parents this story, just in case they're not watching. Okay? So he's looking at me like, oh, you do that. That's what I feel like the Lord just spoke to me. No Forbes. And we're smarter than that. Okay? No Forbes. And I was smarter than that too, but I just didn't want it to work. I just slide it out, and like there they were. Nice and neat, so I could be doing my little work, just writing it all out. Like I'm like a mad whiz this year all of a sudden. I can just write my work right out on a piece of scratch paper, fill the answers in. But see, it's like world's dumbest criminals. I turn them in and get 98, 99, 100, 100, 96, 98. Instead of like doing D's and C's, I go like right from the top. So man, Coach Heisey, what? There he is. That's me on the left in high school right there. So that's me on the left. That's Coach Heisey. That is Tanya Carpenter, and that is Chad Andrews, which is my best friend from high school, and we just hung out and walked like 4 hours in the woods in North Carolina a couple weeks ago. That's Coach Heisey. So Mr. Heisey, he was Coach Heisey's soccer coach. So I remember at soccer practice, he's like, Dallas, I tell you what, I am so proud of you. He's like, you're just doing amazing this year. Like you failed algebra last year. Like I kind of barely failed. It was in my 60s, but still I failed. He's like, you're just doing amazing this year. He's like, you're making an 8. I'm just so proud of you. He's like, hey guys, girls, everybody, listen. If you got any questions with your math, you need to ask Dallas, man. He's just killing it this year. He can help you with your math. I'm thinking, don't ask me. I ain't got a clue. I'm not giving up Shannon because I want to keep getting that paperwork. Ooh, I said her name. Sorry about that. Forgive me, Shannon. You have to. So I do that, and you know what makes it worse? Literally in that hall, it's actually that hallway. On the left, there's this big billboard thing, and I'm like, get named the comeback best student of the year thing or something. I forgot exactly what the awards are called because all of a sudden I failed out for the previous year. Now I'm making like a 98 average. So I'm like comeback student of the year kind of thing for my algebra grade on the left side right there. That kind of made me feel bad a little bit. But not enough to not get those tests with Shannon on Thursday nights. So I keep getting the test, and again, the world's dumbest criminals. I don't think through this. Because then it's right close to Christmas break, and it's like exam time. And I'm like, Shannon, you got exam? She's like, I don't have the exam. Because I don't get that. Because he didn't give us an exam back last year. I'm like, oh man. I got a 98, 97, 99 the first 3 9 weeks. I'm good. So I come in to take the exam, and I'm thinking, this is not going well. Because now, at least the previous year, I kind of tried on test day, so I kind of got like a 67 for the year. We're talking about all summer long, and then all half of the year, I've not done one math problem at all.
in Algebra 2. So you all know that if you do no work at all, it's kind of hard to learn anything. Okay? So I come in the next day, we all sit down, and he says, Dallas, I need to see you. Mr. Hyde, I need to see you. That's not what it looked like when he talked to me outside. So he took me outside the room, and he's like, Dallas, what happened? I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, you bombed on your exam. I don't understand. You're my best student. I said, well, like how bad I do? I'm thinking, I was thinking I could get like a 60-something on my exam, and I could just, whatever. He said, you got a 35 on your exam. You're my best student. What's going on? And I was like, I don't know. I get it because I played, by now it's basketball season. So he was my soccer coach, and now we're in basketball season because it's in the winter, it's December. So I'm like, I guess it was the tournament. We just had a tournament, played a big tournament in Virginia every year. I said, I think it was a tournament. We played 3 games in 3 days, and it was in Danville, Virginia. And I think it was just, I was just exhausted and tired. My mind was just, because I kind of knew that F averaged with 3 A's, I'm still good. I can still pass. I'll get back to form, January. And he's like, I'm going to let you take it again tomorrow. It's just getting worse, man. I felt like Joseph a little bit, except I hadn't read the story yet at that time in my life. So I come in the next day. He has me take a chair outside the classroom and give me the exam again and says, go ahead and take the exam. So I sit there, and I write my name on the exam, and I look at the first one, and I'm like, I can't do this. I put the pen up like, I can't do this. So I just sit there in the hallway the whole class period. Class is over. I let everybody come out. I come in, drop my exam in. I walk up to the front, right where he's sitting, or he's standing down, and I think he's like that against his desk, and I'm facing him, and I was like, here's my exam. He's like, I think he figured it out as soon as he looked at the paper because he saw I didn't do anything. And I said, Coach, I've been cheating all year. He said, I knew you had. How have you been cheating? I said, let me sit down and tell you. He said, Dallas, God, I named you as the comeback student of the year. I said, I know, I feel horrible about that. But I need to come clean. I've been cheating all year, every test. How? And I said, you're given the exact same test as last year, and you sent the test home with the students. You let them take it to have their work, and you didn't change anything at all. And I said, because there was a couple other kids that, they did good in class anyway, so it's hard to figure out who they were, but I had a drastic improvement from the previous year. So I told him what it was, and he's like, well, Dallas, I'm flunking you all in pass grades. So I'm going to wipe the first 9 weeks where you got 3 A's, I'm going to give you 3 F's. He said, you're so far behind now. He said, I'm just going to fail you for the whole year. He said, you just come to class and sit there. You can't switch class because you can't get the credit nowhere else halfway point of the year. You can just sit in class. I don't care what you do. You can sleep. You can do other work, whatever you want to do. He said, but you're done. I said, that's fine. I'm sorry. I appreciate it. And everything was all good. Brought me in. Failed me. Thank God. Back then, I already had my 2 maths done so I could graduate high school. See, now you can't. Back then you could. So I had my 2 maths out of the way. But I made college visits for baseball, for scholarship offers. And because I never got that done, and I fooled around with my math instead of doing the work, I did not get the college scholarships because my grades weren't good enough. Okay, so in the end it cost me that. But in the end I had a great comeback because Christ saved me 3 months after high school and changed my whole plan and my whole life. Everything turned around, and here I am today preaching to you. So you won't cheat and you'll do your homework. Woo! Look at your neighbor and say, do your homework. So look, if we trust God, look at me. If we trust God, we will forgive those who hurt us if we trust God. And what He will eventually make right either on earth or in heaven what has been wrongly done to us. He will. He may write it down here. He may write it up there. But you got to stay faithful in that. Let your past make you better, not bitter. Let your past make you better, not bitter. And here's our last slide. This is God speaking to you tonight. I have a plan. Do you trust me? Can you imagine Joseph trying to trust God's plan for his life and all that he was going through? That's what God is saying to you tonight. I have a plan. Do you trust me? See, in this great comeback story, Joseph epitomizes forgiveness and trusting God, no matter what his circumstances look like.
God says, I have a plan. Do you trust me? Some of you are doing a trust fall before service, and JoJo's like, I'm going to do a trust fall. And her brother Ben was behind her. I'm like, don't you do that. Ben is not going to catch you. I mean, I just was like, nope. Colton was like, come here, Pastor Dallas, I'll catch you. I'm like, nope, ain't going to happen. I don't trust you either. Colton, you will not catch me. So you know what? You do the trust fall, and you got to trust the person who's going to catch you.
Always.
So, yeah. God says, I have a plan. Do you trust me? You do a trust fall with each other. Who was catching you in a trust fall the other day?
No one.
Who was doing the trust fall?
It was last Sunday.
Who was it? Who was catching Autumn?
It wasn't Autumn.
Who was it?
It was Emma. Yeah, Emma.
Sammy, do you trust Autumn?
Yeah.
All right, come here. Come here, Autumn. So stand right there.
If
She's
you
going-
drop me,
Look, this is live.
I have districts coming
She
up.
said, if you drop me, child. That's so cute. That's so cute. We love you.
Districts coming
We
up.
love you. She's precious.
Districts coming up.
You can't look.
Yeah.
You can't look. So look. And she has like a little muscle. She's like a swimmer, competition
50%
swimmer.
muscle.
She's like 98% muscle, like 1% body fat.
I'm like 90%.
Okay. So look that way. You have to trust her. On three. Okay. One. Everybody watch. 1, 2. So we're going to demonstrate what happens. Right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Yes, all right. Now we'll stand there again. Now we're going to demonstrate what happens when she doesn't catch her, okay? So, I'm just kidding. Get ready. So God says, I have a plan for you. Do you trust me? You trust fall and let your friends catch you. Would you trust fall and let God catch you tonight? Would you let Him catch you? Or do but God, but my brothers, but Potiphar, but the prison guard. Would you trust God? Everybody stand. All right, what I want you to do tonight is I want you to lay a trust fall on God. Okay? That doesn't involve you falling backwards. Okay? The trust fall, Leah, come to the piano, sweetie. The trust fall with God, and I just made this up right now. The trust fall with God that I want you to do is you fall forward like this. And you put your head down. You say, God, I trust you with my life. Some of you have trusted other people more with your life and your decisions more than you have God. Some of you put more in what somebody else tells you than what God is trying to speak to you. Some of you are more worried about what friends think about you than what God thinks about you. And God says, I got a plan. Everybody say, I got a plan. That's what God is speaking to us. Do you trust me? I don't want anybody, listen to me, I don't want anybody praying for anybody. Because your plan is for you. I can't make you follow that plan. You've got to choose to follow God's plan on your own. If you're here tonight and you've never accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior of your life, I want you to come to the front when I give everybody a chance. I want you to get on your knees and I want you to look at me and get me to come pray with you. Or get Pastor Jessica or Emma or Allison to come pray with you or Hannah. So we can lead you to the Lord. And you can start that plan of following Jesus. But if you've been following Him, He's got a plan. He wants you to follow it. Life may be like this. It's time to quit talking negative talk. It's time to quit talking dead and start talking life and speaking life. And look at Joseph's life. Man, what a life that he stayed with forgiveness of what God did to him. Right now, in the name of Jesus, heads bowed. Do you trust God? Do you trust Him to follow His plan? Will you step out of your seat, come to the front somewhere, find a place to pray, and trust fall on God tonight? trust fall on God tonight. Will you do it? This altar's open in Jesus' name. Don't worry about what nobody else is doing, who else is coming.